This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Information at vachamber.com. Virginia hospitals and health systems provide jobs. They support our economy and promote public health. Local hospitals are always open to help people with unexpected health needs. Having a stable healthcare network is vital. Virginia hospitals are our lifeline.
I just received a letter from a student who thanked me for instilling the love of math in him. That's why I teach.
Brought to you by the Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and delighted to have three colleagues and friends and people who've just got all kinds of knowledge about the General Assembly and some rumors that maybe some retirements are coming on. Now, Tommy Hudson proceeded and has had some time out, and Ginger Stanley from the Press Association, retirement coming up, Jim Campbell, Association of Counties, and I think it's a unique opportunity for our viewers to hear from the three of you about your experiences here at the General Assembly around the Capitol, to hear the good and the bad and the ugly, if you wish, of what has happened over the years, to hear from you about what you think is really should be continued and maybe what ought to be changed. And so it'll be free-flowing, and I'll watch the time and make sure that we get everything in that you want to get in. Tommy, you've had a bit longer to reflect on what it's like to step out from the General Assembly, and when you stepped out from your firm and your clients, you stepped out completely. So why don't you start, and then Ginger and Jim jump right in.
Thank you, David. Yes, I did. I stepped out completely, and that's why I'm still smiling. But I enjoyed it very much, but it was time for me to go and enjoy other things. I've seen a lot of changes there, and a lot of them for the positive. I remember when I started, you'd have to come down and get the bills, and they were paper bills. You had to go through it, and today you got computers and everything is electronic, and I think it's really opened up the legislature to the public, where before they had no idea what was going on.
Tommy, refresh my memory. You served the Coal Association for how many years?
Well, 27.
27 years.
Right.
And then worked with some other clients too. You know, if you're up in the gallery looking down now, you'd see most of the legislators have gone paperless, even on the floor. And that's a big change. Ginger, you've seen lots of changes. Now, when did you start with the Press Association?
I started in 1984 and started actively lobbying in 86. I also would come down every morning and get all the bills from the bill room, read every single bill, then get the daily calendar and make sure that what was coming up before the legislature I had seen in the bills. So there was a little double check for me. But there were no computers, there were no cell phones. You were here, and you had to get the work done here, and you relied on other lobbyists and legislators to help you through in those early days. There weren't a lot of female lobbyists then, and so it was a little bit of a challenge sometimes to be taken seriously. There had been a man in my position prior to that, so I kind of had to pay my dues a little bit, and I had to prove that I was knowledgeable And as soon as that happened, then it became an enjoyable and just almost a dream career.
And Jim, when did you start with the Association of Counties?
I started with the Association of Counties in 1990, about 25 years ago, but I had some experience before that, actually working for the state agency and the Virginia Municipal League before that. So I actually started following the legislature about 1981, which gives me about 35 years now, if I calculate correctly. So, but it's been quite an observation over the years. Certainly enjoyed it. You mentioned that we've moved from print to electronic formats, and that doesn't please Ginger so much because she likes paper and print quite a bit. So, but it has been a nice transition, and we are seeing certainly the new legislators pretty much reliant on the electronic formats. As a matter of fact, there are probably some tweaks that they need to make in the rules when we start talking about those types of things. So.
When you started, people with local government weren't called lobbyists, legislative liaisons?
We're still trying not to be called lobbyists.
Even though you have to register.
we do have to register as a lobbyist, but we still identify ourselves as legislative liaisons. It just has a little smoother term because from the local government perspective, we do not use PACs of any sort, don't use campaign contributions to get people's attention. We use logic and emotion, and sometimes logic doesn't work very much. So we rely heavily on emotion.
Well, and the newspapers are just the same. We do not have a PAC. I'm not able to take legislators out even for a lunch. We're very strict on those rules. So when the reforms came along, it didn't bother us at all. We were already there and even beyond that. But you can imagine I'm asking someone to go to dinner and the editorial that morning is blasting that particular legislator or legislation that they are patroning. And so it was to my benefit not to be caught into those situations. So I'm quite grateful that, to be honest, because not having all of the late nights whining and dining was good for me. I could go home to my family.
Now tell me, from industry side, industry is a different sort of perspective from local government and press.
Right. We obviously had a PAC we gave to political campaigns. I was somewhat an atypical lobbyist because I wouldn't take people out to eat, things like that. We would try to lobby them here at the legislature, or once every 2 years we would try to carry legislators down to the coal fields so they could see a coal mine and know what we were talking about. We felt that was very educational and beneficial. But I'd like to jump back to the paper versus no paper. I can remember when I started, and y'all will remember it took a while for the bills to be printed at the start of the session. I can remember going into a committee and the chairman saying, does anybody have a bill they want to have heard today? We don't have any printed yet, but no need to waste this time. And I had to stand up and oppose a bill that I hadn't seen, I hadn't read, but it just sounded like a bad idea.
Yeah, right.
And of course I lost that debate. But I think that has shown how having the printed bills electronically helps everybody, helps the legislators and the citizens.
Now, in those earlier years, or even thinking about the 3 decades or so, were there as many bills that died without a vote? That's been a big topic that's come out here very recently about how many bills in the 2016 session died without a vote. Has that stayed pretty common? Or?
There were some efforts at that years ago, probably not as many as now, but oftentimes the committees would sneak off and meet in maybe some obscure places. There are rumors that they even were meeting in the steam tunnels of the Capitol at times to keep the lobbyists away just a little bit. So, and there were certainly some pocket vetoes by certain legislators in the process there. But it seems to be more prevalent now of just quietly disposing of bills at the subcommittee level now than we saw in years past.
Well, I think that's a big difference. There are more subcommittees now than we had back in the mid-'80s. And because of that, more legislation is being dealt with twice in many instances. It may be voted on in the subcommittees, and if it makes it out of the subcommittee, and if that's the chairman's prerogative to hear it again in full committee, if it didn't make it out, then you have a second opportunity. Whereas before, it may have just gone before the committee, did not get a favorable vote, and that's it. That's the end. So is the process perfect? Absolutely not. Should reforms be made so that all bills are given a vote opportunity? I think they should be. I think it's for the best for citizens if they know how their legislator has voted on any particular issue. And it helps going forward with the lobbyists and special interest groups that need legislation and it's not getting through. At least they would know who they needed to talk with and try to educate as to why it's important.
You talked about bills being killed without a vote. I would like to tweak that statement a bit. I think they were all killed with votes, but a lot of times they were voice votes or votes you couldn't track.
Yes.
I don't know if too many that were killed without a vote, but I agree with Ginger. I think the subcommittees, even though it makes it hard on us sometimes because of the myriad meetings we have to go to, I think that's really been a good development because the bills do get a little more hearing. You can go into them in depth in the subcommittees, and then when they come before the full committee, there's a better understanding of them.
So Tommy, you don't remember Senator Willey and Senator Andrews perhaps kind of leaving a bill in their pocket and never bringing it out? They didn't get votes.
They may have had a couple like that, but I can remember one, and I won't mention who it was. They had a voice vote, and the voice vote was resoundingly to kill the bill, to pass the bill. And the chairman said it was a prerogative of the chairman to declare whether a voice vote was aye or nay, and he thought the bill was killed. The committee could challenge him if they wanted to, but no one elected to do so.
Yeah, right. Well, now, Tommy, you mentioned something right at the very beginning, that some changes that you thought were for the better.
Yes.
What would you suggest?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of positive changes. Electronics, the posting of schedules. In the old days, sometimes it was hard to find when a committee was meeting. Today, I think everybody knows that. I'll tell you, and this is not in the legislative process per se, but politics in general, I would like to see less of an influence of money on politics. And one way I think you can do that is shortening the season when people run. In Britain, they have a much shorter time period from the time they nominate someone until they elect them. And I think that would cut down on expenditures. I don't necessarily want a spending cap, but I think maybe you could achieve a cap by having certain periods of time when you could contribute and other periods of time when you can't. And we do that already to a degree by having no contributions during the session. So maybe if we shorten the time for the election or the time for permissible contributions, that would lessen the impact of money.
What does the two of you think that?
Go ahead.
As far as the money goes, of course, we don't give to any candidates, and having a part-time citizen legislature it makes for a very difficult situation for some folks who've got to keep their businesses going year-round, and when they're down here, they're struggling because they're torn as to what they need to do back home. I think it would be helpful if there was a period of time where they were raising funds and actually actively out campaigning, and other times where they weren't allowed to. I think it would help citizens who are running businesses or working for school systems. I think it would help them if they didn't have to do that. And it would be a level playing field that way.
My sense is that many of the legislators spend an inordinate amount of time collecting or soliciting campaign contributions so they can run their campaigns. And as we've seen in the last several elections, they're getting very, very expensive and to run with media advertisements and this type of thing. And it is becoming more of a full-time job for them, whether they like it or not. I like the idea of a part-time legislature. I think you know, 2 months out of the year is just fine. They seem to get their work done. Maybe not as efficiently, but they get their work done, and I think we ought to probably continue that process.
You know, it's been almost 30 years since they've had an increase in salary, and just this session they agreed to change the per diem for meetings between the session to move it up to $300, and there was some debate on doing that. But it would appear it makes it more challenging going forward for even the next generation to keep a part-time citizen legislature when really the income that they receive for that time is not as good as it was in the late 1980s.
And I don't think that many people run for the income that they get from the state while they're here. I think they are doing it, for the most part, they're doing it for all the right reasons. They want to be good servants, and obviously there's an opportunity for additional knowledge when you're down here. You're hearing about all kinds of industry and manufacturing and opportunities coming in. So I don't think anyone is running on a platform of, I need the salary. I don't think that's a part of it. But you're right, it's very low. And I also don't think it should be a reason for anyone to run. I don't think the salary should be so great that someone would run just because they needed a paycheck.
So if you could wave a magic wand, change even one thing in the process, the whole legislative process, what would you change? And maybe it doesn't need a magic wand, it just needs some thought given to it. You've seen changes, because I'm thinking about the time you began, there were more committees in each chamber. Then they reduced the number of committees around the year 2000. Subcommittees then flourished, but the number of committees. So what would be good to be changed, or at least considered for changing?
I'm so glad you asked that question. For years, I have tried to advance the thought that legislators should come to town, just as they do now, early January, have a week to introduce all the bills. At the end of that week, they go home. And so for the next 2 weeks, lobbyists, citizens, the media can look at, read, report on, and get research on the legislation that's been introduced. At the end of that period, they come back, and then there's the committees and your floor, and the process, to me, would be so much better, because there's knowledge in knowing what is in a bill. And you sometimes, like Tommy said, you don't see the bill until it's in committee. I've caught several when they were actually on the floor in a particular house, and you've got to deal with it at that point. So that's my dream. My dream all these years has been that we would have 2 weeks to research, read, study, get feedback from the public, because that's so important to the newspaper industry, is that we know what the public wants and needs. That's my dream. That's my wish.
I agree with that 100%, and we haven't talked about that.
No, we haven't.
But I've always thought there should be a period of introduction, go home, face the public, let the public see what's been introduced, let the lobbyists learn about it, come back, and they would be better educated. I think we'd have a much better result. One other thing, if I could wave the magic wand, and I'm probably going to anger some of the legislators I worked with in the past with this, but we all hear about the redistricting. And, you know, I've got mixed emotions on that, but if we cannot fix the redistricting, maybe it's time to go to a term limit. So you will, in effect, redistrict through the term limits, because I think every once in a while we need turnover, so we bring new blood into this. And that's not an indictment against people who have served for a long time, but I do think something is wrong when there's no competition in the districts and people get to run unopposed.
I certainly agree with part of that, Tommy, but I think I disagree with the turnover. If you look at the last several elections, I think it's been fairly dramatic. You've seen about a 20% turnover in the last couple of elections. Now, they may be the same districts that are turning over each time there. I do, however, agree with you on the redistricting process there, that it needs to be fixed, going back to its constitutional intention, because that's one of the things that's creating the challenges of the modern legislature. The parties are so diverse and so entrenched in their philosophy that they're not able to come together and compromise. I love to reflect back on the early 80s and mid 80s, when we would have the same debates, the same certainly vigorous challenges between the two parties, but then that night everybody would get together and go out and enjoy a dinner or a beverage or something like that, and the next morning they'd come back and work on their parties together. So we miss those days.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think the personal aspect is gone, even though they were at loggerheads, and it may not have been any better in reaching decisions during the day. At night, people were friends again.
That's right. That's right. And we don't seem to see that right now. So.
Well, before the time's up, what's something you want to comment on? I thought sure David was going to ask me about that, and David hasn't asked. So, Jim, Ginger, Tommy, what's another thought that you'd like to get out to the folks about this business that you've spent a career in?
Well, I've certainly enjoyed my entire career in local government in the last 35 years in an area called impacting legislation. It has been good. I've met a lot of great friends. Ginger and I have battled royally for about 25 years because we actually, our two associations had some different philosophies on things. But I've always respected her and her team for what they were doing, and I know she's felt, I think she's felt likewise about me, but the friends that we've made during the time have certainly been worthwhile. We don't always get our points across to the legislators, but I think the lobbying organizations understand what we're doing.
And that's what I'll miss. I will miss the camaraderie. I was so excited to see Tommy today. I will miss the friends, and as Jim says, you know, we're on the opposite side of issues most often, but we can see each other at a hockey game, and it's good. It's good, and I will miss that. And but maybe not the 6 o'clock meetings a.m. or the
Right.
10 o'clock meetings p.m.
Right.
I will not miss the 14 and 16-hour days.
Right.
I need to leave that to a younger person.
And I certainly agree with that. I wish Ginger hadn't brought up the Hokies, since I'm a VMI man.
Yeah, right.
But I love the job. It was the best job on earth. There were times I didn't feel that way, and there were times that when the session was over, it was like getting out of the rat line at VMI. You were glad you could live again. But a wonderful job, wonderful people, and what I miss the most, I guess, is working with people to reach solutions that nobody thought was possible. Because if you take this the right way and you work together, we can do that.
Tommy, Ginger, Jim, thank you, each of you, for being on This Week in Richmond.
David, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community. For jobs, the economy, and public health, Virginia Hospitals, our lifeline.
The Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.